Welcome back to Mind Pump TV, guys. I'm your host, Danny Matrenga. Today we are at Sand Strength, about to dive into 3 of my favorite athletic lower body moves to increase performance. But before we do that, I'd like to take the time to thank Momentous for sponsoring this video. If you're a lifter or an athlete, you have unique protein needs. You need to take in a little bit more than the average individual. And that's why a lot of us turn to protein shakes. Okay, but when it comes to protein supplements, quite frankly, they're not all created equal. And Momentous does a tremendous job of providing a transparent, high-quality product. Now, we made a video to kind of break down the things you should be looking for in a protein, and I also encourage you to check out Momentous' website, which we'll link in the description below. But let's go ahead and get into these 3 moves to boost athletic performance. The first movement we're gonna dive into today is a single leg Romanian deadlift. Now, if you're an athlete or a lifter at all, I'm sure you're familiar with the deadlift pattern. Now, a deadlift is a hinge movement, whereas a squat is more of a knee flexion extension movement. So this does bias the posterior chain, or the glutes and the hamstrings. And if you take a look at any athlete, you'll almost always find they have very well developed glutes and hamstrings. But one of the unique things about sports is they generally require a lot of unilateral stability and unilateral strength, meaning it's not as fixed as going up and down on both legs. A lot of things happen on one leg. So taking a movement like a Romanian deadlift and making it unilateral or single leg has a ton of applications for enhancing sports performance. So I'll show you the setup and execution. It's not too technical when we consider that at the end of the day, it is still a Romanian deadlift. What we want to do is start in this position with the shoulders back in retraction and simply choose the foot that we're going to stabilize with. So for this video, I'm going to stabilize with my right leg. That's going to be my base or plant leg. I'm going to unlock the knee and lower the dumbbells downward, just as in a Romanian deadlift if it were on 2 legs. Now, of course, I'm going to feel the majority of the tension in the base leg, but it should still be in the glute and in the hamstring, and you'll notice that foot wants to wobble. You have to stabilize a little bit more through the ankle. And all of these are great things if you are, in fact, an athlete or somebody looking to enhance not just the strength of your glutes and hamstrings, but also your stability, your core strength, your balance, okay? All of these are great. I recommend working in a similar rep range that you would with a RDL. So I like these for sets of 6 to 8 per leg, looking to progressively overload over time. Really quick, guys, though, let's talk about common mistakes with the single leg RDL. The biggest one is going too fast, simply rushing the exercise up during the eccentric or lowering phase. That's not gonna do you a whole lot of favors. Athletes need to have the ability to decelerate. Lifters do too. So when you do the single leg RDL, lower the weight slowly and come up aggressively. Okay, don't rush it down and rush it back up. We don't wanna bounce it. We don't wanna live in that wobbly space. Be stable. Slowly lower the weight down. Fire up through your glutes and hamstrings. All right, guys, so the second exercise today is a standing split squat or a static lunge. Whatever you want to call it is fine. Now, this one complements the single leg RDL tremendously well because it's also bilateral, but instead of being that hinge movement, it seems to be a little bit more of a knee extension movement. Now, we are going to be hitting the glutes, the quads, and the hamstrings on this, so don't get it twisted. It's not pure quad like its cousin, the Bulgarian split squat, which is a little bit more biased towards the quad and towards the glute. So the setup for this guy is pretty simple. From the base foot position, we're gonna slide our foot back, trying to maintain a vertical shin on the lead leg. Now, in most cases, I'm not too worried about the knee going over the toe. That's fine for almost anybody if you don't have knee problems. But just for the technique and execution of this exercise, we're thinking vertical lead shin as we lunge, because that's gonna help us use our hamstring to pull the shin back a little bit, our glute, our quad, kind of in concert. So, setup is super simple. Again, from the top, boom, lead vertical shin, rolling through the ball of the foot, hands on the hips, coming down under control, exploding up, coming down under control, exploding up. Now, if you want to load it up and use some dumbbells, you're more than welcome to do so. Just down, explode up, down, explode up. You can level this guy up a lot of different ways. You can come down slow, drop, and explode up. You can focus purely on the eccentric and go down on a very long count. Count to like 6 and explode up. But what I recommend is this. Get that lead shin vertical. Make sure you have the right spacing between the feet. Go down under control, explode up, and try to feel glutes, quads, and hamstrings evenly. I really want to reiterate a point I made earlier when it comes to setting up the split squat, because this is the most common error I see, and it has to do with the placement of the feet. Whereas the rear foot elevated split squat, or as it's more commonly known as the Bulgarian split squat, tends to bias the quads a touch more. This version of the split squat or static lunge is a little bit more symmetrical in how it hits the lower body. It does a nice job of hitting the glutes, hams, and the quads. And we don't necessarily want to bias one over the other. So make sure that you're set up at a comfortable distance, that you don't feel everything going through the quad, and you kind of feel a more symmetrical working out, if you will, throughout all 3 of the lower leg muscles. All right, guys, last exercise today is going to be these sliding hamstring curls. Now we're gonna use these little $10 foot pads. You can get these anywhere that sells exercise equipment for the most part. If you don't have access to these, you can use something like towels on a hardwood floor. But more than anything, we're looking for 2 symmetrical objects that are gonna slide on whatever training surface you're using. Now, remember that hamstring is predominantly responsible for what we call knee flexion, or kind of bringing your ankle closer to your butt when you're in this position. So the setup's pretty simple, actually. Just set up on the heel of your foot, like so. We're going to be doing this motion, but we're going to be doing it from the downward position, okay? My hips are going to go up. And I'm sliding in and out under control. You notice I kept my hips high to engage my glutes and help my hamstrings fire that much harder, and I controlled it throughout the entire range of motion. This is great for athletes because we have to do a lot of deceleration work. Some athletes do train in variable positions, and this is also a nice way to train the hamstrings without a ton of load on the spine. Biggest and most common mistake with the gliding hamstring curl is forgetting to extend the hips, right? While we are training flexion of the knee and really trying to isolate the hamstring there, one of the bigger functions of the lower body is hip extension. And while we mostly think of that as a glute movement, the hamstrings do help play a role in extending the hip. So not only will you get a little bit more out of your hamstrings if you remember to extend the hip when performing the gliding ham curl, you'll also be hitting your hamstrings that much more effectively. All right, so to wrap things up, remember, first we had the single leg RDL, making sure we're stable, balanced, working everything evenly through the glutes and hamstrings. Looking for anywhere between 6 to 10 repetitions there, depending on how heavy we're going. The second movement, again, the split squat or static lunge. Trying to have everything working evenly between the quadricep, glute, and hamstring. Might get a little more quad. Again, about 6 to 10 reps, depending on how heavy you're gonna be going. If you try a more explosive variation, you might even do even less. And then the last one, the gliding hamstring curl for those glutes and hamstrings, making sure our hips stay in extension, sliding up with aggressive force and coming down under control. I like to do that one to fatigue. Each of those is great for about 2 to 4 sets, depending on how much time you have and depending on what you're doing with the rest of your workout. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Make sure you do me a favor, like this video, comment below if you have any questions, and subscribe to the channel. Would love to have you around. Have a good one.